the webinar questioning and listening skills. And I guess the most appropriate place to start, firstly to introduce myself. I'm not sure what Fiona said before because I was clearly offline. My name is Heather Montoute, and I work now as a board and executive coach, but in my previous life I was global head of business development and client relationship management for a major investment bank. And so obviously, you know, this webinar has been designed for those of you in customer and client-facing roles. But if I was to ask you the first question, which would be around what is the purpose of developing our questioning and listening skills, and why you've decided to join the webinar this evening, you probably all have slightly different answers. But as I said, whilst we've designed this for those in client-facing roles, for me, questioning and listening skills are the key to success in every relationship that we have in life. When we feel listened to and understood, we feel valued. Whereas when we feel we're not being listened to, we feel anger and frustration. And ultimately, our self-esteem is then diminished. So if we were to look at our personal relationships, just as an example, they are all enriched by people with good questioning and listening skills. We all value friends who listen to us and ask challenging questions of us, which help us to find answers that are within ourselves. By thinking about those questions and thinking about the answers, we value our partners and spouses when they listen to us. And of course, you know, the very best parents are also good listeners. You know, when we move on into our academic lives, when we're studying, again, question and listening play a hugely important role in our success and our ability to learn and develop. And then when we get into our professional lives, again, questioning and listening hold the key to our success. Those that listen well and ask good questions they form good relationships with their peers and their superiors, and they learn fast and progress up the career ladder. Now, I'm often asked why we always tend to group these two skills together. I guess it's the difference between, really, for me, you know, you might say, can I be a good listener and or a good questioner? But they really just go hand in hand. It's about being able to demonstrate that we're good at it. It's almost like saying, you know, you could say to your boss, yes, I'm really good at this, but then you have to demonstrate it. And when we demonstrate that we're listening well by asking good questions. You know, I was actually, just a trivial example, I was actually out at a dinner party last week. There was a guy at the table I didn't know, and he was asking me lots of questions, but he wasn't actually listening to the answers. So the questions were completely unrelated, if that makes sense. You know, he wasn't, sometimes he didn't even give me an opportunity to answer. He just wanted to ask a question. And then during the evening, he probably asked me the same question 3 or 4 times because, again, demonstrating he hadn't listened to what I'd said. So questioning and listening absolutely go well together. When we're listening, we can't, I don't know that you're listening if you say nothing or do nothing. You know, when I'm facilitating, I'm often wondering, are they listening? And then they'll ask a question that's related to what I said, and you think, oh, yeah, they're definitely listening. So if that makes sense, I think what we need to move on to is the next slide, Fiona, where we're talking about the key skills that are needed for listening particularly, and questioning. And the first thing we need to do is to build rapport, building rapport and making people feel comfortable. The second skill is active listening, i.e. we need to demonstrate that we're listening, and that's what I was talking to and alluding to in the introduction. One way of doing that as well is questioning, but we must ensure that our questions are well formed in order to uncover the right information, the information that we're seeking. And then we also need to demonstrate our understanding of the answer by talking about, and suggesting solutions based on the information that we've found. So let's start with building rapport, which is on slide 9. And first of all, there's a lot of questions around what rapport actually is. An awful lot of people think that rapport is where you actually have to like someone, and that's really not the case. You can have really good professional rapport with people that you don't necessarily like, you just have an understanding of the value in their relationship. So it may be that you have huge respect for your boss, you don't like him. You might have huge respect for your client, but you don't like them. In my client relationships, certainly, I have quite a number where I would choose to be in a social situation with them, and some where I would absolutely choose not to be. Sometimes I'm forced to be, but I can maintain that rapport all day because it's a professional rapport. It's about having a connection. There definitely needs to be a trust between you. And when I say it's a prerequisite for effective communication, what I mean is that when we're asked questions by people that we don't have rapport with, it makes us feel uncomfortable. If we've got rapport with someone, they can ask us questions that if anyone else asked them, we might consider them personal. So, in a client relationship, when we've got rapport, we can ask things like what our competitors are giving us pricing, or we can ask, what their personal objectives are for the year. If we don't have rapport, those questions will be considered uncomfortable and inappropriate. So that's what I mean by it's a prerequisite. What it isn't is a lot of people say, when I've got rapport, it's about being accepting of everything, or we just roll over in front of the client. That's absolutely not true. The whole purpose of having rapport is that you can challenge your clients, and you can be quite robust, and you can have some very good conversations. You can have pricing discussions. You can have negotiation discussions. But the fact that the rapport exists enables those conversations to take place. The other thing that people mistake rapport for is they call it copying body language, which I consider to be really quite rude. We're going to talk about NLP in a minute on the next slide, but we mustn't confuse matching with copying. So if we go to the next slide and talk about NLP, because I'm a master practitioner in NLP, but what we see in rapport is a synergy. It's not somebody copying someone else's body language, which looks like they are taking the mickey out of them. But if you were to, for example, do one of my favourite pastimes, which is people watch, if you can actually be on a balcony and be watching people down below you, perhaps in a bar or certainly a social situation, you can tell when people are in rapport. I do a lot of work with nightclub bouncers and bar bouncers about watching people's behaviour to see if they're in rapport or whether they're in conflict. And the way in which they position themselves is a very, very good indication as to whether it looks as though they're in harmony, and or whether they're about to have a conflict, because we tend to step away and turn ourselves away from people initially once the rapport is broken. So it's always very interesting to sort of look at people and go, oh yes, well, they're having a row, they're married, they're married but clearly not to each other, and so on and so forth. But you can actually tell whether there is a harmony in the way in which they're interacting. And also, when we think about the movement and voice, and that's really quite important around pace, because the pace with the person that you're trying to communicate with, then that can also feel very uncomfortable. Some of us talk much, much quicker than others, and if someone is talking very, very quickly with someone who talks quite slowly and sort of measured, then it feels that it's not in sync, and it feels uncomfortable. I guess the overarching thing that I can say about rapport is that if it doesn't feel comfortable, you're not in rapport. And that's really the the guiding rule. Coming on to slide number 11, where we're talking about one of the ways in which to build rapport is what we call active listening. And active listening is really just about demonstrating to the person who's speaking that you're listening to them, so that you're actually paying them the respect that they're looking for. One thing is maintaining eye contact, and don't confuse that with staring right at them. But we all hear our parents' voice saying to us, "Look at me when I'm talking to you," or even at school, "Look at me when I'm talking to you." Maintaining eye contact is a way of saying, yes, I'm really interested in what you're saying. That's one of the difficulties of doing a webinar, because, of course, I can't see whether you're listening or not. I don't know whether I've got your eye contact. But that's very important. I've said not staring, but, if you're ever at a party or at a networking event and someone is not looking at you in the eye, or they're looking over your shoulder, or looking around the room, and if they're not looking at you, then you really don't feel that they're listening to you. It almost feels like they're looking for someone much more interesting to talk to. Maybe they are. But it's really important that eye contact is maintained. And then, again, coming in about the questioning, which is totally linked with listening, asking questions, but taking the time to listen to the answer. And then the real skill is picking up on what they say and then asking a further question to get more deeper information and get into more of the detail. So you're saying, not only have I asked you a question to show I'm interested in you, I've listened to everything that you've said, that's prompted another question, and that's, and I'm demonstrating even more interest in you by asking that. Even when we clarify, if I put clarify and summarize, of course, summarizing is an absolutely classic way of demonstrating that you've listened, because you're then summarizing what they've said. And of course, you're saying, I've listened to every word, is that right? But also when we ask a clarification question to say, oh, so do you mean this? Or, so what do you mean by that? Or, I'm not really quite sure I understand that. Again, you're indicating that you've understood everything else and you've listened, and therefore, it's just this little bit that you're not quite sure of. But also, I think, small things, just like nodding and acknowledging, and the acknowledge can be yes, oh, absolutely, or little words that just show that you're still engaged in the conversation. The next line about open and relaxed body language. I'm not, while I am an expert in body language, but I don't automatically think that somebody who's got their arms crossed isn't listening. Some people cross their arms because they're cold, or, they feel uncomfortable themselves because they're not relaxed, or a whole number of reasons. So don't assume that just because someone's got their arms crossed that they're not listening to you. But I think it's about being careful when you're the listener to appear as though you're open, because that suggests that you're open to what's being suggested to you and that you're open to listening to it. And then finally, we have taking verbatim notes. One of the best ways to flatter someone who's speaking is to take note of what they say. And then you've got the ability to play it back. So, at a trivial social level, I feel very uncomfortable if I'm in a restaurant and I give my order to the waiter and he doesn't write it down. On the one hand, I could admire his memory skills, but on the other hand, I'm really thinking, am I going to get the meal that I've just ordered in the way that I've ordered it to be cooked? And I don't really have the confidence that I will. And I think that certainly when I've been on the buying side and people have come to sell me something, if they haven't got any notepaper, I give them some. Because how can they remember everything about my business and be able to come up with the solution that I want if they haven't taken any notes? And even if you've got the most marvelous memory, it's a demonstration of your listening that you take notes, because for the speaker or for the client to know that whatever they're saying is important enough to be written down, is hugely flattering, and they feel comfortable with you because they think that you're listening to what it is that they've got to say. Okay, so moving on to slide 12, let's just think for a moment about what some of the barriers might be to communication. What stops us listening and what stops us understanding? Because I think we've got to remember that we're listening to understand. And so one of the first things that creates a huge barrier is jargon. I work in many, many different organizations, and the very first thing that I have to do is to actually start to understand the language that they're speaking, even though it's all English, apparently. But the jargon that we use around abbreviations, around acronyms, initials for people, just nicknames, in talk, just all of these things. And to the uninitiated, we have no idea what they're talking about. And often when people are going out to sell products to clients, they're talking in their own language when they need to be talking in the client's language. And we need to avoid jargon, and we need to, when we send out internal memos, I can read an internal memo. I have no clue what they're talking about. And the battle to get jargon and acronyms and initials and abbreviations out of the corporate language is huge. And I think that's something that we absolutely have to be careful of, certainly in client situations, and make sure that we're talking the client's language and in something that they will understand. I think the second point is how long can someone listen intently without something else happening? And really, it's about 2 minutes. Bearing in mind we've been on here nearly half an hour, that's not really boding well, is it? But one of the key reasons why we use slides and visuals and and interactive things when we're presenting is because the average listening span is 2 minutes. But then if something else happens, like a new slide comes up, or they have to get up and do something, or just something to distract them, and then they come back. Again, we have to remember that. And we also have to remember around our voice tonality, because if we were just speaking in one monotone, that would just be unbelievably boring. And there would be no break in it, and there would be nothing to listen out for, and we would just sort of generally slide off into unconsciousness. So I think that's something that we need to be aware of when we're listening and when we're trying to get people to listen to us. What I mean by prejudgments, and the next point, which is about the openness of the listener, it's really about when you're trying to speak about a subject that the listener already has a very, very strong view about, and therefore they're closed to your view. You can be making the most valid arguments, but until you break down that barrier and get them to be open to what you have to say, then you really will be banging on a closed door. You need to think about the length of the communication. For me, I think that the shorter it is, the better and more powerful. I think there's a huge amount to be said for less is more. In sales presentations, I see so many where they spend 2 hours talking about themselves and about 5 minutes talking about the client. Whereas if they just spent that 5 minutes talking about the client and what the difference would be working with them and what the impact would be on their business, they would make their sale. forget the other 2 hours worth of this is how good we are, because it's only relevant in terms of what you're going to do to the client. So there's no point describing your product for an hour and then the client's left to make the link between what this product will do for their business and how it will make them money or how it will save them cost or whatever. Give a high-level view of the product and focus particularly around what it's going to do for your client, what it's going to do for their business. Is it going to make them money? Is it going to save them money? Is it going to reduce their cost, time, efficiency, etc., etc.? Okay, the last one is, the last bullet point there, is around the level of knowledge that the listener has, because too much or too little will always be a barrier to the communication, because those that know an awful lot about a subject tend to switch off. They might think, oh yeah, this is all old hat, I know all of this, I don't need to listen. And then they will miss probably the 3 or 4 golden nuggets that come out that might be new information because they just weren't listening. Or, if a listener has no knowledge at all, then you've really got to take it slowly and really open up the conversation before you can get into the main points of what you're trying to say, if that makes sense. Okay, so that's really what I wanted to talk to you about listening. So that's the first part of the webinar. Moving on now to talk about questions, slide number 13. And you'll see here a quote from J. Krishnamurti, which says that the answers that you seek are in the questions that you intend to ask. And I've highlighted you intend because what I'm trying to get people to do when they come on my, my sales skills workshops is plan. Rather than walking into a client meeting and just asking random questions, that makes everybody feel uncomfortable. But if there's no structure, if there's no sort of thread to what it's trying to do, and also, your client their mind is going to go everywhere. It's like, well, I was here once, and then I'm there, and now I'm here, and I don't really understand where this is going or what the question's about. So planning is a good thing. And by that, I don't mean just writing down a list of questions, because that's not very effective. What I really mean by that is thinking in advance about the information that you need to walk out of the meeting with. And that is, so what is it that I need to know? You might be going for a job interview. What is it that I need to know about this job? And then at the end, when they ask you, do you have any questions, you think about the information that you needed. You think about, oh, I've got all of that, so I've got 2 outstanding questions. Or when you're thinking about going in to see a client and you need to know about their business, don't go in and just say, tell me about your business. Yeah, that's just where to start. And it makes the client feel uncomfortable because they think, oh, you haven't done any research. I suppose it's a bit like going out on a date and they say, oh, tell me about yourself. It's, oh, God, what do you want to know? And I think the clients feel like that. So let's try and plan a bit and think about what information we need from this conversation, from this meeting. What is it that I need? And therefore, what questions could I ask that would actually get that information for me? And questions that are well-formed, they then tend to, what I call, land well. And that means that the questions don't feel awkward. They don't feel personal. They don't feel inappropriate. And one way in which to do that, which I've outlined on slide 14, one way in which to do that, the way I think about it, is to give a reason as to why you want to ask the question and ask the permission. So in a first client meeting, for example, I would say, I'm selling sales training, for example. So I say to them, okay, well, I've identified you as a potential client for my sales training. I think it would make a good fit. But in order to establish that, I need to ask a number of questions about your business to make sure that I'd be the right training partner for you. So would it be okay if we just talked a little bit about what you're trying to achieve with your sales team? And then they understand exactly where I'm coming from, what I'm trying to do, and I've got their permission to ask them a number of questions around what issues they may have with their sales team, what they're trying, what challenges they might face, what KPIs they've got, just so that I can think about how I might suggest a solution with regard to what I'm trying to sell, which is, of course, sales training. And then when I put the questions to them, I tend to use the format which I've put on slide 15 there, which is the spin technique. This is copyrighted and trademarked by Huffwaite, and it's been in the market for a long, long time now, but it's still very, very relevant. So that this is kind of being able to structure your questions so that they follow a plan, and you don't come up with random streams of questions. We call it the question funnel, which starts with a sort of broad question, and then you follow it up and get more and more detail until you get to the bottom of the funnel when you're getting into the real, what we call nitty-gritty of the issue. So SPIN, the first, the S will stand for situation, P for problem, I for implication, and N for need. So again, if you're talking about, I'm trying to sell sales training, so a situation question is it's almost like an establishing question. It would be, you're almost establishing what it is that you're going to be talking about. So then you go into what the problem is around that particular area, then what implications does that have for the business, and therefore what need for my product or my service does that suggest? So to give you an example, I might say, all right, so I understand that you've just opened a new office in the USA. Situation, yes, that's right. So how's that going? Oh, well, we're not actually getting the sales or the hitting the targets that we anticipated. The implication of that, both on the organisation, will be, well, the implication of that might be the office needs to close, people might have to be made redundant, or, I'm not going to deliver my objectives this year, so I won't get my bonus. And then it comes down to the need around, well, is there a training need there that could actually solve the problem? But it's almost sort of following it down, you almost trying to get your client to tell you what the need is, rather than the alternative would be to go in with the need. I could go in and say, hey, I really think you need some sales training. They'll go, oh, no, we don't. It's almost like someone knocking on your door and saying, oh, you need, I'm selling roofs, or I'm selling double glazing. They really need to take you through the problem that you might be experiencing in the first place before they can sell to you, and then you can identify a need, and then you can then sell in a product or a service that is actually going to service that need, if that's making sense. The next thing is to think about the type of questioning that you do. And when I say the type of questioning, I've put together on slide 16 what I consider to be some really helpful questioning types. And those really center around open questions. Open questions the shorter the question, almost, the longer the answer that you get. So open questions, obviously start with a what, how, where, when, who, why. But I tend to avoid asking why questions, or questions that start with why, mainly for the reason that it's an implied criticism. It's almost like, if your boss asks you, why did you do that? You kind of think, oh, I've done something wrong. And often our clients can think that as well. So if we say, well, what was driving that? Or, how did you arrive at that decision? Or, what prompted you to think about that? It tends to land better rather, as a question rather than an implied criticism. And then if you get an answer, you tend to get an answer, first of all, at the high level. So you would follow that up with a probing question. Say, oh, well, in what way? Oh, that's interesting. Tell me more about that. And then, sometimes your client will be talking about a number of things, and you note certain things, and then you can go back and say, well, earlier you said this, and, and you can lead them into another area of questioning. An alternative question is always good. We call it the alternative close. Would you like to pay by cash or credit card? Would you like to start next week or the week after? Or, those kind of things. Hypothetical questions are good. So what if I were able to solve that for you? How much would that help you in your business? And then closed questions really do have their place, which once you've got to the end of the funnel. So you've done all of the probing, you've done all of the, the linking, etc., and then you get to, what would it take now to sign the order? And then it's, okay, so are you ready to sign now, yes or no? Because at the end of the funnel, you absolutely want a yes or no answer. Because then if you get a no answer, you can then go back to say, okay, so what would make it a yes? In my experience, a lot of salespeople walk away without asking that final question. And they make the assumption that the answer is yes or the answer is no. You absolutely have to close in the meeting with a yes or a no, because then you can deal with it whilst you're there. If they say, no, I'm not convinced, then you've got the opportunity to ask, okay, so what would convince you? What would make you do this deal? What would I need to demonstrate in order for you to say yes? Those are really good questions, but you actually have to ask the closed question, yes or no, in the first place. On the next slide, I've put some questions that I see all the time, which are the most unhelpful questions. Multiple questions particularly, and these tend to be born out of a fear of silence by the person who's doing the questioning. They don't like the silence. And what we have to remember is that when we ask a question, we have to allow someone to think about the answer. If someone says to you, what's really important to you about your job? You might want to think for a minute. And you need to pause and let them think. What I find with an awful lot of client situations is because there's a little pause, they jump in with another question. So you get, I put a couple of examples there, but you might get, so how would you like to take this forward? Good question. They think about it, and then they'll say, shall I send you a proposal? And the client might just say yes, because it's easy. But what they definitely will do is always answer the last question that you ask, when really you want the answer to the first question that you ask. So what you actually have to do is get yourself comfortable with the silence, because the silence is them thinking. And don't jump in, because if you jump in, you're giving them the answer. It's almost, there was a survey done in the US where they went around saying, what is your favorite color? Is it red or blue? And 98% of the people answered red or blue, whether that was their favourite colour or not, because what they were taking was the option. And even if their favourite colour was green, it was, well, out of red or blue, it's red. So, the survey said, this percentage of people have a favourite colour red, and that's not true at all. It was a multiple question. So what they should do is, what's your favourite colour? Pause, let them think about it, and tell you the answer, which will be a truthful answer. Leading questions, such as, so, you happy to sign then? Or, we've all heard in courtrooms of objection, that's leading. Leading someone to what the answer that we want rather than actually the answer that they should give. And then open to closed in the same sentence. And a good example there, which would be, what are your issues? Because that's what you need to know. But then if you say, do you have any problems with your current suppliers? No. You've missed your opportunity to actually get from the client the information that you really want. Okay, so moving on to the next slide. This is what I call the iceberg, where most of it's beneath the surface. And this is the questioning that I've been talking about is designed to get the 90% that's beneath the surface. Poor questioning will probably get you the 10%. The 10% is information that your client is prepared to share with anyone. The 90% is the information that they are prepared to share with you because you've built great rapport, because you've listened well, because you've asked really good questions. And they've felt really, really comfortable, and then they start to give you information which you wouldn't ordinarily get. The surface information is all about facts. If you press the button again, Fiona, the surface information is all about the facts that they'll give you, but underneath are what their opinions are, which you need to uncover. You need to understand where they're coming from, what it is that that they really mean and what they really feel. And again, if you press the button again, you'll see that what's visible on the surface, that's almost the kind of information that's in the public domain. It's the invisible stuff underneath the surface that the questioning techniques and listening techniques are designed to uncover. As you press the button again, it's the known versus the unknown. Things that, the known things that you could have found out from their website or from their accounts, but the unknown are things around the internal workings of the company that they will only share with people that they have trust with. And again, if we press the button again, we'll see that it also relates to the fact that on the surface it's all the corporate stuff, which again is they feel more comfortable sharing, but underneath it's that personal stuff that once you get to grips with that and you can get under their skin, that will actually make you more successful. Again, they should probably share their hopes with you on the surface, but underneath, what's lurking underneath are their fears. Their fears maybe you're trying to persuade them to change supplier, or change buyer, or change training provider, whatever. What are their fears around that you'll need to overcome? And finally, what we're saying is that on the surface you get the policy. They're very, very happy to tell you what the policy is, but as we all know, in every company, in every business, there is a policy and there is a practice. And they, again, would be happy to share with you what their policies might be, but what we really need to understand is what happens in practice. Okay. So, again, you can look at the structure that's on the surface of an organization. What you're trying to question are the politics that go on. So for example, you can have a structure which says who's the decision maker, and they may be the one signing the form, but the politics will actually determine who's got the most influence. and who can block it, and without whose approval the deal wouldn't go ahead. That's what you're really trying to uncover. And again, on the surface there is information that is seen by all and is probably shared with you and all of your competitors, but underneath are what are your next opportunities to actually sell within this client. So if we move on now to the final slide, the top tips slide, which is really around, number one, you need to focus on active listening and rapport building. Once you've actually built that rapport, take verbatim notes to demonstrate that you've listened. Use the questioning funnel and helpful questions to uncover the needs and the wants above and below the iceberg, and use examples to test possible solutions to the problem. They're my top tips, and that brings us to the end of my presentation. I hope you've enjoyed listening and that you've got something out of it, and I'll hand back to Fiona.
Okay, we've got a question that's come through. Just bear with me a second. Guys, if you can obviously send through any questions that you have for Heather now, that would be great. I'm going to go back to one that we had sent in earlier, if you bear with me a second. I had a question from Hannah, who's going back to talking about rapport. And she said that you mentioned that that if it feels uncomfortable, then you're not in rapport. And she's just asking what advice you would have for helping managers or individuals that have a low EQ and never seem to be aware that they're not in rapport. So how could they actually improve?
Oh, I mean, is she talking about her manager, presumably, who's not in rapport?
That, or just general managers or individuals that they're aware of are not in rapport. Oh, Heather, we've lost you. Hello? Heather? Just bear with me, people. We seem to have lost Heather again. Just bear me a second. No, I seem to have lost Heather. So while she's just dialing back in again, so I can just move on to forthcoming webinars that we have coming up. There's one on the 14th of May, which is being run by the Open University. On great days at work, and that's practical tips to turning stressing into thriving by Suzanne Hazelton. So if you are interested in that session, you can get in touch with Janet Barker, who's on the session today, but just get in touch the usual way. And also we've got another one on the 11th of June with Heather on the art of negotiation, including salary negotiation. So fingers crossed that goes a lot better, because we've obviously had technical problems this time, unfortunately, so I do apologise for that. I'm just trying to see if I can see whether Heather's been able to join us again, so please just bear with me. Oh, she's probably here. Heather?
Yes, hello. I am
You're back, sorry. We lost you there.
Line. It keeps beeping and then you cut out.
Oh, okay. So going back to the initial question.
Okay, coming back to the question, I think that, if it feels uncomfortable, of course, we all have to take responsibility for creating rapport. So it's probably due to perhaps, the manager feels awkward. So the more that you can do to actually make him feel comfortable, the better it will be. So, we all have to take responsibility for building the rapport and making people feel comfortable. So that's about making sure that we're demonstrating that we're open and relaxed. We are, breaking the ice. We're the ones trying to make it comfortable and make them feel comfortable. I think that often it's awkwardness because we we forget what we are putting off. And if we're putting out, you know, that we feel uncomfortable with it, then that's picked up on, and then that just exacerbates the problem. So I think, you know, she needs to just, you know, in her own mind, think about what is it that I can do. And I can guarantee that if she really tries hard to build that rapport and be open and relaxed and try and make him feel comfortable by asking something that he's comfortable with, that will actually help.
Okay, hopefully, Hannah, that helps you. Hannah did ask a question a bit earlier. Was her question that bad you disappeared? You've had enough. So no, we apologise for that.
The beeping's back, I'm afraid, but
yes, unfortunately, technology.
Maybe a good thing, Fiona, is if they want to submit their questions, then I could answer them on email, perhaps, or you know, if I disappear again.
Okay, that's absolutely fine. I can send them your email address if that's the case. Yeah. We've got another one that's come through from Ellen. Let me just have a read through. Just saying that you mentioned that giving a reason for asking, like give a reason for asking should come first and then asking for permission to ask the question. Yeah. How can you probe the answer if you notice that the respondent has an agenda of their own?
How can you probe the answer?
How can you probe the answer if you notice that the respondent has an agenda of their own?
I think that happens.
More clarification. Are you okay with that?
Yeah, I think that happens an awful lot. And often if they've got an agenda, but part of that will be about whether or not they feel comfortable with you. So I think that if they've got an agenda and they want to give you certain information, but what will tend to happen is that if you listen really well, there will probably be one or two inconsistencies in what they're saying. And then when you listen well and take notes, that's how you spot the inconsistencies. And you sort of say, well, that's interesting because, you know, I hear this and then I hear that, and I'm not really sure which way we're going here. You know, an example might be when, you know, a politician's asked a question and then they give the answer to the question that they wanted to be asked. If that's the kind of situation that she means, it's like, well, yes, I understand what you're saying there, but actually what I really particularly wanted to know was, or thanks for clarifying that, or acknowledge the fact that they've answered, but then ask a more probing question. And then if you still don't get the answer, say, yep, that's really helpful, you know, thanks for that. But one thing that's outstanding for me, so just trying to get to the next level of detail all the time, if that helps.